So just to keep in mind what we've been doing here in this unit, we've been talking about all the different things involved in collecting data before we analyze it and then make conclusions from it. And we have talked about types of sampling, ones that are biased, ones that are not, in terms of random sampling. But really what we've done to this point is we've just looked at what we call observational studies. If you take a survey of people, or if you collect a bunch of things and measure, or you observe animals for some type of behavior or something like that, that's called an observational study. Okay? What we're going to do now is we're going to go into experiments, because experiments you can draw different conclusions from that we'll talk about in the next lesson. So just as an example, okay, we've got a segmented bar graph that shows the historical comparison of gender in scientific careers across countries and disciplines. So basically, STEM fields. And it shows the gender gap. The blue represents males, the percent, I think the first four are research papers. The percent of males that account for research papers in science, all science, and then specifically engineering, physics, mathematics, and then you also have data science, the percent of the data science workforce. And you can probably see something pretty clearly, okay, that women seem to be very underrepresented. That the majority in all of these fields, whether it's workforce or research papers, are men. One possible cause of that could be hiring bias. In other words, they're overestimating the number of males and underestimating the number of females. Okay, so how could hiring bias cause these trends shown above? Well, it's possible. Even hiring bias. Women are given fewer opportunities in STEM research. Space here, and the STEM workforce. So that when people are hired in different fields, STEM fields, it's favored towards men. Therefore, more men are hired, and that's hiring bias. But the thing is, can we prove it? Like, is this enough to prove that hiring discrimination is the cause of the gender gap in these scientific careers, in these STEM careers? Okay, we can't necessarily say that hiring bias causes the gender discrimination. It may be something else. So, no. Because there may be other variables that are causing the gender gap? In STEM fields. Which means we're not entirely sure exactly what's causing the gender gaps, because hiring bias may, but there could be other variables involved. So because of those other variables, we refer to them as compounding or confounding variables, or sorry, which provide alternative explanations for the trends between the explanatory variable gender and the response hiring rates. Can you think of one? What could be another factor that might create the gender gap? What's that? Sure. And what could cause that? Like why would fewer women apply? Think of what's that? Well, no, they should be able to have access. Okay. What do you think the difference between boys and girls is in school when it comes to math and science? What's sort of the historical belief? That boys are better at math and science, okay, which could cause fewer females, because maybe females have heard, not, I mean, hopefully not at this school, I don't think so, but that females have had to fight through more, and they've heard that, oh no, you can't succeed in these fields. You can succeed in other fields, right? That's changing. It's getting better, okay, but it's still out there, okay, and it still can cause difficulties for you guys, okay? So our society still doesn't fully encourage females or girls when they're young to pursue math and science. Maybe that's what's causing. You know, girls have heard, well, you're just not as good at math and science. You're just not as good as math and science. You know, maybe you should consider another field. So are they gonna pursue a STEM field? Well, probably not. Are they gonna like go for a position? Probably not. Okay. So that's the idea of confounding. And that takes place when we are talking about observational studies, or when we are talking about samples, or which is a type of observational study, is a study in which data is collected without imposing any treatments. As soon as treatments are applied, now we get into experiments. There's really two types of observational studies. A retrospective study examines existing data. So maybe you want to answer some question and you go read and you go find out existing data. A prospective study follows individuals to gather future data. There have been a lot of studies done where children have been, they're observing some behavior in children, and they observe them like over several years, like through elementary school, maybe even through elementary, middle, and high school. Yeah. Future data. So both cannot show cause and effect because they can't control for confounding variables, other variables. This is actually very important. And we're going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about this more in the next lesson. When can we say something causes something else? When can we not say something causes something else? Basically, what it comes down to is that if you do an observational study or sampling, you can't imply cause and effect. But if you do an experiment and if you do it well, you can imply cause and effect. So we want to talk about experiments now. Okay? So an experiment is a study in which some treatment is imposed on subjects. And like I said, if they're well designed and well implemented, they can show cause and effect. By controlling potential confounding variables. So we're gonna focus for the next little while on experiments. What's everything that's involved in experiments and how we go about implementing experiments and what makes good experiments and bad experiments. So let's say that we take this, we want to see if there's any hiring bias in STEM fields. So we're going to do an experiment, and here's how an experiment might look. So in this study, experimenters printed up copies of fake application materials for a science lab manager job. All applications were identical except for one thing, the name, one on which one was listed as John and the other Jennifer. So they found 127 science lab faculty members, randomly sent them either a John or a Jennifer application. Each faculty member was told that the application was for a real position at their university. And so the faculty members were asked to rate the applicant's hireability on a 1 to 7 scale and estimate their starting salary. And then these results were compared across the two groups. So a few vocabulary words. Experimental units. Those are the individuals, and by individuals, I don't necessarily mean humans. You could see it could be any one of these. A lot of times, yes, in people, but it could be animals, experimenting on rats, okay? Plants, objects, particles, etc. So, who were the experimental units in this study? The what? Yep. The faculty members. Just like we talked about in Unit 3, when we analyze the relationship between two variables, we have an explanatory variable and a response variable. Well, the explanatory variable is the one that we're purposely going to manipulate. And it's also known as the factor. Okay, so you may be asked, you may be given an experimental situation, asked what's the factor? That means the same thing as the explanatory variable. What was the explanatory variable of this experiment? The applicant name. Treatments are the different levels of the explanatory variable in an experiment. So in this experiment, what were the treatments? And how many were there? 2. They were? Yeah, John, Jennifer, Resnick for applications. And then from that, we want to see the response variable. That's the outcome. What happens? That's what happens. And what was the outcome in this experiment? Or outcomes? Higher ability and salary. We're going to return to this John and Jennifer study too. We're going to continue with it today, but we're also going to return to it as we finish the unit. Okay. What makes a good experiment? Or in other words, what are the components of designing a good experiment or experimental design? There are 4 of them. Okay. Comparison, random assignment, replication, and control. So comparison. How would comparison used in the Jennifer John study? Holy, I am not, my hearing's fine. Stop messing with my head.
Are they the ways that one choose the application based on the answer?
Yes, yeah, so there's basically 2 groups, aren't there? There's the Jennifer group and the John group. Okay.
I'm still thinking.
Still thinking. Okay. Keep thinking. All right. So the experimenters. Error. The yeah, probability. Between the Jennifer and John groups. Always good to have something to compare to. Okay. So in this case, there was two groups that were given different treatments. Sometimes there's only one treatment to give, so the two groups could be, one could receive the treatment and the other doesn't, or receives an alternate treatment. Anybody know what that's called? If you took AP Psych? No. If you're given an alternate treatment, a placebo. Okay. Somebody's excited, and I didn't hear it at all. Okay. So, and that's just basically what I said there. Another big thing, we need to randomly create the groups. So why would it be a problem if the experimenters, let's say, some of the, a tier 1 university lab got all the John applications, and a tier 2 university lab got all the Jennifer applications. That's confounding, right? Because then we can't tell. Is it the actual, like, is it gender bias, or is it because of the difference in the two universities? Okay. So random assignments. Sorry. This would create confounding.
So confounding variables are like accidental explanations.
Not necessarily accidental. I don't know if I put that word in there. I think I know what you mean.
Unpurposeful.
Well, it's just other things that could possibly happen, whether by accident or not. Okay, so this would create confounding. Or sorry, I should say, it is gender bias or hiring bias. Caused by the different names on the applications. What should I say? The quality of the university. It's hard to tell. So random assignments. This is important. Random assignments. Controls for confounding. And creates if you just have two groups, two roughly equivalent groups. So it would be much better that instead of giving all of John's to tier 1 and all of Jennifer's to tier 2, is to mix them all up, the tier 1 and tier 2, and then randomly assign. Because then you're going to be creating two, not perfectly equivalent, but roughly equivalent groups. That's important. That's the purpose of random assignment. Okay, creates two roughly equivalent groups, or roughly equivalent groups if there's more than two. So just to know the difference between observational studies, if we're sampling, and experiments. Okay? If we're random sampling, it reduces bias. if we're randomly assigning or random assigning, it reduces confounding. So that's the second one. Third one, you got to be a little bit careful with because it's not what you think it means, or it's likely not what you think it means. If you think replication means do the experiment over and over and over and over again, no. Replication means having a large enough sample to perform an experiment on. Generally, the larger the better. Okay. Because, like, what if you only assign one faculty member to the John group and one faculty member to the Jennifer group? Well, there could be such a difference between the two. There'd be all sorts of confounding going on. We need more than one. Okay?
But is that not just to do the experiment over and over again?
No. Well, not really. Well, I see what you mean. Okay. But you're not just using, the thing to emphasize is you're not just using one person, you're using several in each group. Okay. So, it would be very difficult to sell. If hiring differences because of gender, or the differences between single applicants in each group. Or sorry, the single faculty members. Single faculty members. And I mean, there could be such a variation between them. But you're not going to get very good, you're not going to get very reliable results. Okay? So larger treatment groups. Reduce the likelihood of differences because yes. Right? I mean, like, it really just comes down to if you use one faculty member for each resume, it would really just come down to chance, like who gets which one, right? And that's not obviously very efficient, and that's not a well-designed experiment. So the more people, it reduces that chance variation that one group is going to be different than the other. And finally, control. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Okay. So control. If you think back to the experiment, how did they control it? to go back to the explanation of the experiment, everything was exactly the same except the names. Okay? Applications were exactly the same except the names. So those are the four components. Okay? We want to be able to compare groups. We want to randomly assign treatments to those groups. Okay? We want to have a sufficient number in the treatments. And we want to control everything as much as we can, control for any factors that might lead to confounding. And when we do that, we come up with what we call a completely randomized design. Okay? So a completely randomized design is an experimental design in which the experimental units, or the individuals, are assigned to treatments completely at random. So you can be asked to describe a completely randomized design, and you want to have certain things in it. Okay? I mean, you can do it in bullet form, you could do it in paragraph form. So basically what we want to do is, so going back to the Jennifer John experiment, how would we implement a completely randomized design with the 127 faculty members? So, well, the first thing that we would do is randomly assign approximately, because it's not a number, it's not going to be the same. Randomly assign approximately half faculty members get Jennifer resume, the other half get the job. And probably the best way to do random assignment would be, Brooke, how would we randomly assign? What would we use? Spinning wheel, thank you. Okay. Otherwise, we might just use a random number generator. Okay. Okay. And you can see how we can randomly assign in that box below. Okay, so the next thing would be to do is apply the treatments. And check the results. And the results would be higher ability and salary. let's say four. 3, all of us here. Okay. So basically, when you are asked to describe a completely randomized design, follow this here. So you want to make sure you want to talk about the random assignment and how precisely you're going to go about it. Then you want to mention that you're going to apply the treatments, and then you want to mention that you're going to check the results, whatever the response variable is that you're measuring. Okay. So that's the basics of experiments, but we're going to go into a little bit more discussing experiments in the next lesson. That'll be that.